So let me start by saying I'm not a fan of Armored Core. I never liked the old games. I felt that they were kind of janky and whatever. The reason why I was interested in Armored Core 6 is because it is made by Fromsoft, and I love Fromsoft. I love their Souls-like games. That's kind of the big thing that I'm a fan of. Elden Ring is currently one of my favorite games that I've ever played in my life, along with like Zelda and stuff. But I'll admit that my main hope with this game was that Fromsoft would take all of their past years' experience and make this the most streamlined version of Armored Core, and they did. So while this game isn't a Souls-like, you're gonna notice a lot of the juices that make a Fromsoft game. Combat has a really nice ebb and flow, bosses have multiple phases, and there's also multiple endings. Now that said, the story itself is not nearly as complex or deep as like Elden Ring and other Souls-like games. For the most part, the entire story is gonna be delivered to you with audio logs with a couple cutscenes peppered in, but not really that many. You won't even get your first choices that actually impact the ending of the game until like maybe chapter 3 or 4. And even then it's very limited because when you go into New Game Plus, you'll actually be presented with new missions and new mech parts that you wouldn't be able to get your first playthrough. Interestingly enough, yes, there is multiple endings that you cannot get in your first playthrough that you'll be able to experience in New Game Plus 1. And then if you go even further than that into New Game Plus 2, there's even more mech parts and missions that you couldn't do in your second playthrough. The thing is, even though the majority of this game is presented through audio logs, let me tell you, it's actually kind of interesting. Like, I don't think this game's gonna win Game of the Year awards for any narrative purposes or anything like that, but I'm traditionally not a fan of audio logs. I listen to every single one of them because I just find the story in this game to be so hilarious. We are essentially playing as the bad guy. Like, I don't know how else to put it. You're a mercenary gun for hire, and one corporation will hire you to destroy another corporation's assets, and then that corporation will hire you to retaliate at that first corporation, and you're just sitting here like, all right, I'll do it. Just pay me. Moving on to the gameplay. Gameplay is going to be broken down into a couple different categories. So first and foremost, this game is linear. You're going to be progressing through missions. Some of them will provide you with a limited choice that will affect the next mission that you can do. You'll be able to replay missions to get high grades on them, but for the most part, you just replay them so that you can grind out the currency. Because the other main aspect of the game, obviously, is the mech customization. And as you progress through the game, you'll get more parts available for you to purchase from the in-game shop. The amount of builds that you can do on your mech are staggering. There is a lot at play here. There's a lot of different weapons. There's a lot of different parts to your character's body and stuff. And it's just, it can seem pretty intimidating. But the thing that's nice is when you end up buying a part out of the shop, you can actually just resell it to the shop for the exact same amount of your currency back. So it really pushes the idea of experimenting and trying to find your own build. What I would suggest to keep you from being overwhelmed is to just pay attention to these two stats, which is your equip load and your energy load. Basically, these two are going to be affected by the battery that you choose will decide how much energy you have to expend with certain weapons and certain body parts. And then the legs that you choose will be what mostly determines your weight capacity. So the heavier weapons versus the lighter weapons. So what I would do is take a battery and legs and then build the rest of your mech around them. But the biggest difference between Armored Core 6 and other FromSoft games is that the combat has verticality because you can fly with your jets at any time. So that's another thing that you gotta factor in with your specific build, because certain legs will actually benefit you by having like a higher jump or being able to hover in the air for longer. The reason why this is important is because of the combat in this game. Combat comes in 3 different flavors. There's going to end up being the normal passive enemies that barely put up a threat. You'll usually one-shot them and don't gotta give them any attention. There's other ACs that you'll come across, and these can vary in their difficulty depending on your own current build. And then there's the mainline bosses, which again will determine their difficulty based on your build. The main boss you've probably already heard a lot about is Balteus, which is going to end up being the chapter 1 main boss of the game and what a lot of people consider to be the casual filter. Suffice to say that while the previous bosses in chapter 1 are difficult, Balteus is on a whole other level and is the hardest thing that you've ever fought in the game up to that point. Now, despite his difficulty, I'd still say that he is a necessary evil to this game, because Balteus is essentially a build check. This is the game trying to teach you to change your build to better fit the situation. The thing is, even though I struggled so hard with Balteus, he was basically like the tutorial boss, because every boss after him, I only died like maybe 5 times or under. There's just something about his battle in particular that once I beat him, it just clicked with me how the game worked. Now, a couple more important factors I should mention while we're on the topic of bosses is that before you fight most every boss in the game, you will have the opportunity to restock all of your supplies, because you can actually run out of ammo in this game, believe it or not. Why would you end up keeping items in your inventory when you can just sell them back to the shop to get all of your money back? And that is because if you die to the boss, you can respawn right outside of their boss room, but you have the opportunity to rebuild your mech with all of the parts that you own. Now, the last thing I gotta tell you guys in terms of the gameplay and bosses and all that stuff is I would suggest that if you can, resist looking online and try to figure out a build that works for you. The game wants you to experiment, and I just think that it is so much more gratifying to beat the bosses with a build you came up with rather than just looking up some dumb meta build on YouTube. Now let's just do an awkward jump cut to the next category, which is going to be the graphics. The graphics are great. Everything is very stylized, and in true FromSoft fashion, while the screen gets very, very busy, you can still tell what's going on most of the time. While there was maybe like 2 times in the entire game where I had frame rate issues, for the most part, this game is very well optimized on PC. And that's saying something in this day and age. Now let's awkwardly move into sound design, which I think is stupendous. In true FromSoft fashion, there is a lot of audio cues that you can rely on to make combat a lot easier, whether it be when an enemy locks onto you and is shooting a missile. There's kind of a little delay between that beep beep and when you dodge to get out of the way. But then on top of that, there's also a nice death sound when you kill enemies, so you know when you've killed them and know you can just, okay, they're not a threat anymore, I can move on. The music is also stupendous when it ramps up. There's not many songs in the game, and unfortunately, the game does reuse Balteus' song a little bit later, which felt really lame to me, but still, it's an amazing soundtrack. Lastly, let's talk about replayability, which is incredible in this game. Lots of games have New Game Plus, where you go back to the beginning of the game with your end game build, and that's great. But the thing that's so interesting is when you get to New Game Plus 1, there's new missions and new parts that you can obtain that you couldn't get on your first playthrough, including new bosses and new endings. And then in New Game Plus 2, it does that again. There's even more missions, more choices you can make, more gear you can get. That's awesome. Why wasn't that in Elden Ring? But yeah, anyways, let's wrap this up. As far as an arbitrary score, 5 out of 5, obviously this game is masterclass. Now that said, I will say, I don't think this game is for everybody. It is very weird, it is very fast paced, and it is also very challenging. But if you can tough it out and force yourself to get through the harder segments of the game, there is something genuine here that you don't experience in most games. It's something that FromSoft has managed to deliver in almost all of their games. It's still crazy to me to think that FromSoft is one of the few AAA studios that delivers an incredible product no matter what it is. Armored Core 6 might not be a Souls-like, and might not be a game that I would have initially played if not for the fact that FromSoft made it. And while I wouldn't consider myself an Armored Core fan enough that I would play the older, jankier games, I guarantee you if they give me an Armored Core 7, I will buy it without question.